Hello and welcome to Dollars and Cents, the Australia Institute podcast where we're talking about just what the hell is going on in the economy. My name is Elinor Johnston-Leake, the senior content producer here at the Australia Institute, and unfortunately our chief economist Greg Jericho is away sick again this week. He is on the mend, but he'll be sitting home today. So in his place, very kindly again, we've got our senior economist, Matt Grudnoff. Hi, Matt.
G'day. I'm turning into replacement Greg.
What have you done to Greg?
Nothing that I'm willing to admit to.
Oh, okay. So, Matt, our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, is in China at the moment on a 6-day visit, and there's been a lot on his agenda.
Kicking off his 6-day visit to China, the Prime Minister
has hailed talks with President Xi Jinping a success after meeting with the Chinese leader.
A commitment to equal treatment, to seeking common ground while sharing differences.
That approach has indeed produced very positive benefits for both Australia and for China. I say the same thing in Beijing as I say in Bankstown, which is that the Australian government supports free and fair trade.
He's met one-on-one with President Xi Jinping. He visited the Great Wall of China, as one does. And he had a meeting with Australian miners and Chinese steel manufacturers that was centred around Australian iron ore exports being used to make green steel in China, so made with less carbon emissions. So all in all, he's been pretty busy. But apart from specifically promoting sort of green steel industry, what does Albanese want out of this visit to China?
I think he wants a stronger trading relationship with China. He wants to sell more stuff to China. They're our biggest export partner by a long way. I mean, we export more iron ore to China than all of our exports to America, about 3 times as much.
Wow, yeah.
And so, compared to the US, China is a massive trade partner to Australia, and I think he wants to strengthen those ties.
Apart from iron ore, what do we trade with China?
Well, we sell a lot of gas, as well as the usual suspects like coal, gold and beef, a whole load of different stuff. And we also buy a lot of stuff from China. I mean, the amount of stuff we have that's made in China, as you can imagine.
Yep.
A lot of stuff comes from China. So there's a strong two-way trade with China. And incidentally, China has the largest trade surplus of any country in the world. But
Can you just quickly define what a trade surplus is?
Yeah, so a trade surplus is when a country sells more stuff to other people than it buys from them. So Donald Trump famously hates these. They don't actually mean anything, really. It's not a problem. If you like stuff that a particular country sells, you're going to want to buy more of it. And if they don't like the stuff you want to sell, they're not going to buy it. And
he just doesn't not like it because China's number one, or?
Yeah, well, exactly right.
Yeah.
But so China has, in aggregate, a trade surplus. That is, it tends to sell more stuff to people overseas than it buys from them. But one of the few countries that isn't the case is Australia. We sell more stuff to China than we buy from them. So they are a very important trade partner for us.
So a lot of the things you've mentioned are, iron ore, beef, gas, that's all just stuff that we export. What about services? I know that international students have been in the news a lot lately. Do we have a lot of those come in from China?
Yeah, so traditionally China's been a really important source of international students for our education services. And our education services are our 4th largest export behind iron ore, coal and gas. And I mean, they took a huge hit during COVID.
Yeah.
The international student numbers have completely recovered since then, but interestingly, not students from China.
Interesting.
Basically, what's happened is international students fell off a cliff during COVID, as you would expect. They've then rebounded in total from all nations and are now above what they were in 2019 before COVID, but they haven't reached the 2019 peak for just Chinese students. So Chinese students have become a smaller proportion of the kind of education services we sell. And presumably one of the reasons that Albanese was in China was to try and strengthen that because, again, it's one of our big exports.
So why have the numbers gone down so much? Do we know?
Yeah, so we had a rocky relationship there with China Trade for a while. For a few years there, they were quite upset at us and they used trade as a way of punishing us. And so they didn't ever ban students from coming to Australian universities, but they did suggest to Chinese students strongly that they might want to pick other unis apart from Australian unis. And while they've kind of lifted that, I mean, there's been a real easing or a thawing, as they say in international speak, in the relationship. I don't think we've yet seen that full rebound. But given the thawing, it's likely that there will be a rebound.
And maybe this is a strange question, but how important is trade to the Australian economy as a whole?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, it's very important. It's about a quarter of our economy. So it makes up about $1 in $4 earned in Australia, our exports. So it's a significant part of the economy, and it has been for some time.
And is that, how do we compare in that regard to other countries?
Yeah, we're considered an open economy that is fairly reliant on trade. So we're sort of a medium-sized open economy. And open means that we buy a lot of imports and we sell a lot of exports. So we have a lot of international trade. And that's one of the reasons that there's been a lot of anxiety in Australia over Trump and all of his tariffs. Because if Trump sets up all these tariffs, if other countries retaliate, and then countries around the world start thinking, well, international trade is not a good thing, we don't want this, and they all look inward and put up barriers, Australia is one of those countries that will be most impacted by that. But just to be clear, the US is Australia's fourth largest trading partner, but it's actually quite small compared to some other ones. And so just tariffs on Australian stuff from the US is going to be slightly painful, but not particularly painful. What the fear is not that only the US will do it, but this will spread further and other countries will embrace this kind of, it's only me looking inwards, putting up trade barriers. If that happened, then we'd see a real impact on the Australian economy.
This morning, a major escalation in President Trump's global trade war.
The latest of a series of new letters to trading partners has threatened a 50% tariff on Brazil.
Mr. Trump specifically pointing to the ongoing prosecution of one of his longtime allies, Brazil's former president Jair Bolsonaro,
who's facing prosecution accused of trying to overturn the outcome of the 2022 election.
What they're doing to their former president is disgraceful. I know the former president. He fought like hell for the people of Brazil, that I can tell you. And I believe he's an honest man.
You mentioned before the time that Australia and China had a bit more of a rocky relationship when it came to trade, sort of during COVID, where China was restricting some exports, not including iron ore, things like barley or lobster. How different is that from really what Trump's doing at the moment with his tariffs?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Like we rightly condemned, China using trade as a method of coercion to try and, achieve political goals or other goals by using trade. But you're right, Trump is basically doing exactly the same thing. He's levelling tariffs on other countries for reasons that are entirely different from trade. And a great example is the recent announcement by the US of big tariffs on Brazil. And this is because Bolsonaro is being prosecuted by the Brazilian government because basically he lost the election and he's allegedly tried to coup his way back into power.
Well, birds of a feather.
Trump likes Bolsonaro. So basically he's putting trade tariffs. He's basically using economic coercion to try and force Brazil to do something that they don't want to do. It is very similar. And that's kind of part of the problem with what Trump is doing and why America has suddenly become such an unreliable trade partner and such a worry for the world because, if America's going to use trade as a stick to try and belt other countries, whether they're allies or not, then, you don't know what they're going to ask for and whether or not they're going to belt you with it. And so why would you increase your trade dependence or reliance on America when, in a few years' time, it could come back to haunt you when Trump wants you to do something you don't want to do?
I can't help but think, isn't it a bit ironic that we're spending, $300+ billion on submarines, and a large reason given for that is so that we can defend Australia against China, who is our biggest trading partner and that we're building further trade relationships with?
Yeah, so it is weird. The entire debate around having to increase defence spending is really bizarre. The first part of the bizarre nature is it's never explicitly said that it's China that we're concerned about, but everybody just kind of winks and nods and that's what it is. The second thing is the more integrated your economies are, the more you trade with a particular nation, the less likely you are to go to war, right?
Makes sense.
You've got a real incentive to not go to war because both of your economies are becoming more and more dependent on each other. And so as we've seen kind of our dependence on China and China's dependence on us, just to be clear, even when China was really annoyed at us and really wanted to punish us, they never talked about cutting the iron ore trade.
Yeah.
They need Australian iron ore. So the Chinese economy needs Australia's exports as much as Australia needs to sell or needs to buy stuff from China. So the idea that we're going to go to war, you'd think that would lessen the likelihood that Australia and China would go to war, and it does. But if that's the case, then why do we need to spend these enormous amounts of money?
Yeah.
Who are we defending ourselves against? And, if we look around our local region, we're actually the huge superpower of military spending in our local region. So just to give you an idea, Australia is not only the biggest in our local area, we are bigger than almost all of the nations around us. So if you added Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, New Zealand, Myanmar, Cambodia, Brunei, PNG, Fiji, and East Timor's defence spending, and you combine them, they're still not as big as Australia's.
Wow, that is shocking, actually.
Yeah, exactly right. So we are a big spender on defence. Australians don't realise how big we actually are. So we're certainly not a threat from anybody around us. And, it's not like Russia's going to come and invade us. They're on the other side of the world and they're kind of preoccupied.
I think they've
Europe.
got other countries they want to get to first.
Exactly right. So who exactly is the threat? And China is a huge trading partner. So this kind of push to spend more on defence, and look, we're a democracy, we're a rich country, we can spend money on whatever we want. But let's be clear, if we spend a whole heap more on defence, that means we're going to be spending less on health, education, aged care, infrastructure, all of the services that we've come to rely on. We're going to have to spend less on those, or we're going to have to increase taxes. But, it comes at a cost. Spending more on defence comes at a cost. And I'm not convinced that there is a really strong argument that Australia is somehow, being threatened at the moment and needs to.
And when it comes to defence spending, it really seems like there's just, I'm not really a blank check, but compared to, if the government tries to push through, say, like an increase to job seeker or a change to, the tax rate, it's truly just a clusterfuck for, months on end. Everyone has an opinion. But if we want to spend more on defence, there doesn't really seem to be that much of a discussion about it. It just kind of happens.
If we want to spend $300 or $400 billion on new submarines.
That we probably won't get.
Look, and that's why it's really important to have a parliamentary inquiry into spending that kind of money on AUKUS because we need some democratic oversight of this. We need to look into it and go, that's a lot of money. Shouldn't we be discussing and analysing and thinking about whether or not that's the best way to spend money on defence and whether or not we even want to spend that much on defence? That's why the Australia Institute is calling for a parliamentary inquiry.
And then also on defence spending, both the United States and the coalition have called for Australia to increase defence spending to a certain percentage of our GDP. The coalition's calling it for increase to 3%, the US to 3.5%. Which,
I think it's up to 5% for the US
5%.
now. Yeah.
Gosh, sorry. Matt, do we actually spend anything else as a percentage of our GDP?
No, it's a really unusual way to talk about spending. So normally if you want to spend more on, say, unemployment benefits, then people talk about, well, we need to lift the rate to a certain amount to lift people out of poverty. Like, okay, the objective is for people not to be in poverty. Here's how much we need to spend to achieve that. So, here's the goal and here's the money and this is how we're going to do it and this is how much it will cost.
Yeah, the goal comes first.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
We don't just say, oh, well, we need to spend, X% on this. And it doesn't really matter how you spend it. It doesn't really matter.
But we need to spend it.
Yeah, we just need to spend it. It's a really odd way. And we don't do that with any other government spending at all. And if you tried to do that, I imagine the coalition, who's very big on this percent of GDP, would jump up and down and shout, that's a waste of money. All it's going to do is,
give us the detail.
Yeah, give us the detail. But we don't have the detail on, what we're going to spend, what we're defending against, what tools the Defence Department needs, how much they're going to cost. No. We just need to spend as a percent of GDP. And just to highlight how really stupid as a percent of GDP is, right? We could increase the percent of GDP we spend on defence by simply doubling the amount we pay soldiers, right? We'd have exactly the same number of soldiers. Yeah. We'd have exactly the same defence capability, but we'd be spending more on them. Yeah. So as a percent of GDP, it would go up.
Yeah.
Right? So we haven't changed our ability to defend at all. We're just spending more on GDP. We could do an even worse job, if that's possible, in our defence procurement and waste even more money on things. We could, screw up our procurement of ships and submarines and planes and missiles and end up having massive cost overruns. And as a percentage of GDP, guess what? Our defence spending would go up, right? So that's why you don't do it as a percent of GDP. What you're after is a particular outcome, right? And you go, well, I want to achieve this outcome. How much is that going to cost? I'll go back and look, what's the cheapest, best way of the most efficient way of achieving that? And that's how you budget. You don't budget as a percent of GDP.
Well, sounds very sensible to me, Matt. Maybe you should have gone to the Department of Defence.
I don't think I'd be very welcome.
No? All right. Matt, we've mentioned before on the podcast that the federal government is convening an economic reform roundtable, which, and I'm quoting from the website, aims to build consensus ways to improve productivity, enhance economic resilience, and strengthen budget sustainability. It will bring together a mix of leaders from business, union, civil society, government, and other experts. Apparently, our illustrious chief economist and usual Dollars and Cents host, Greg Jericho, didn't qualify for an interview to this roundtable.
Maybe he was too sick.
Did you, Matt?
No. I like Greg. Was perhaps it's in the mail. Perhaps the invitation.
Maybe got lost.
Jim Chalmers. I'm sure Jim listens to this podcast. If you're out there, I'd love an invite.
Yeah, send us the Facebook event invite
That's
link.
Right.
But one of the invitees, the Commonwealth Bank, maybe a bit understandable why they got invited. They made a submission to the Productivity Commission's review that was ahead of the roundtable. And it's made some pretty interesting suggestions to Treasurer Jim Chalmers.
Big bank, you'd probably expect them to,
do big bank things.
Yeah, cut company tax.
Yeah,
and,
wear a monocle, carry a cane. Yeah, that sort of thing. But what were the suggestions that they made?
Well, they were surprising because they weren't what you would expect. So, the Business Council of Australia and other kind of business lobby groups have been banging on for years that we need to cut company tax. But the Commonwealth Bank said we can't do that. It shouldn't be a priority right now, which is interesting coming from the Commonwealth Bank. They're probably Australia's biggest or one of Australia's biggest company taxpayers. Clearly, they see the value in taxation. They also thought that we needed to have a discussion about wealth taxes, that Australia doesn't tax wealth enough.
Interesting.
And their logic is sound. The logic is, well, with an ageing population, we're going to have less and less people in workforces. So we need to be able to collect money from non-labour, so non-income tax. And there's a big pot of wealth out there that's poorly taxed. And, that's a great way of the government raising revenue. And so they wanted to have a discussion about wealth taxes, which, we absolutely agree with. They were also interesting on superannuation. They thought that uncapped superannuation was unsustainable, was how they put it. And what they meant was being able to put enormous amounts of money into your superannuation account, getting huge superannuation tax concessions is bad. That, superannuation wasn't designed as basically this giant tax avoidance scheme. It was actually to try and fund a comfortable retirement. And perhaps you don't need hundreds of millions of dollars in your super account, or even tens of millions of dollars in your super account, or even millions of dollars in your super account. Perhaps, they talked about capping it, that is limiting the amount of money that people can get into their super account. And to be clear, we're talking about $1, $2, $3 million sort of cap. The Commonwealth Bank didn't nominate a figure, but that would be kind of what we were talking about. And, therefore limiting the amount of tax concessions that go to rich people.
It's interesting. I didn't think that I would agree with them on so much.
Yeah. It was certainly surprising. But, another way of looking at it is, look, we tax wealth so badly that Australia's biggest bank thinks we should tax wealth more.
Yeah. What does this tell us about where the economy is at, that the, in my head, monocle wearing Commonwealth Bank are making these suggestions?
It says that we are in desperate need of reform and that wealth taxes are a great way of increasing revenue without slugging ordinary workers. And to be clear, when we're talking about a wealth tax, usually in other nations, you have what's called a giant tax-free threshold on wealth. And that tax-free threshold is like in the millions, right? So you only get taxed on your wealth above a certain amount, and that threshold could be 5 or 10 million, 3 million, something like that. So you're really only slugging people who are quite wealthy. But because they are so wealthy, you actually generate quite a bit of revenue. It's great for redistribution. It's great for reducing inequality, and it's a great revenue-raising exercise that allows governments to continue to provide the services that we all rely on.
Oh, well, maybe this, economic reform roundtable will actually have some... Maybe they didn't need you, Matt.
Yeah, look,
don't worry.
Maybe
the Commonwealth Bank was there in your stead.
I can be represented.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on again, Matt. I will say, hopefully, Greg will be better next time, but that...
We will see. We will see.
This episode of Dollars and Cents was recorded on Thursday, the 17th of July, and things may have changed since recording. If you want to read more, you can read all of our research at australiainstitute.org.au. Our music, as always, is by Blue Dot Sessions, and we'll see you next week. See ya.
Bye.